Welcome to my channel, Vibes of Life. In today's story, why salt on your windowsill will change everything. C.S. Lewis inspired. We begin not with a myth, but with a quiet truth most people overlook. Something you've probably seen in your grandmother's kitchen or a neighbor's odd ritual. Just a little pinch of salt on the windowsill. It sounds so simple, so harmless. But what if I told you that act, so small, so ordinary, could protect you from forces you didn't even know were real? What if that salt was the last barrier between your peace and something quietly creeping in? It all started on a Thursday afternoon under a grey sky in a quiet countryside house that had been in Evelyn's family for generations. She was a literature professor, the kind who spent her evenings rereading the screw-tape letters and her weekends in dusty bookstores hunting for forgotten voices. She didn't believe in superstition. She believed in reason, logic, and the written word, until the day she found a letter, one that wasn't supposed to exist. It was tucked inside a second-hand copy of Mere Christianity, its edges yellowed, its ink faded. The letter, unsigned, read, "If the salt is gone, so is your shield. They watch from the windows." Strange, vague, but oddly specific. At first, Evelyn laughed. But later that night, when the air grew still and the wind refused to blow, when her dog refused to enter the living room and stared, ears pinned back at the windowsill, something in her began to shift. It wasn't just her. Across the town, in houses old and new, people began whispering about strange dreams, about lights flickering exactly at midnight, about shadows standing too still. A child in the neighborhood drew a picture of a dark figure staring through the window, and in the corner beside it, a line of salt had been smudged away. That's when Evelyn began to wonder, was this folklore or a forgotten truth? She turned to the works of C.S. Lewis, searching for clues, and in his words, wrapped in theology and metaphor, she began to see something, subtle warnings, symbolic rituals that weren't just fiction, but veiled truths. Salt, he once wrote in an essay, was the mark of the preserved, the keeper of decay. What did he mean by that? Was he speaking spiritually, or had he, like her, glimpsed something behind the veil? Evelyn wasn't the only one drawn into the mystery. Her friend Malcolm, a skeptical historian, joined her. Together they uncovered old letters, war journals, and even a church record that mentioned the salt line as a protective measure against the unseen. They were just beginning to piece it all together when the salt vanished, not spilled, not blown away, gone, as if something or someone had taken it. And that's where it begins, because salt on a windowsill isn't just an old wives' tale. It's a signal, a seal, a story buried in time and nearly forgotten. But now something wants it gone, and Evelyn is about to find out why. So stay with me, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about safety, faith, and the silent war happening just outside your window. Evelyn stood in silence, staring at the clean line where the salt had once been. She hadn't touched it. No breeze had come through. The window was shut tight, locked the way she always left it. And yet the salt, her quiet experiment, her last-minute nod to a superstition she never truly believed in, was completely gone. Not scattered, not disturbed, just gone. That absence felt heavier than presence, like something had reached through the night and stolen it with purpose. She didn't sleep that night. The air in the room felt thick, like it was pressing in on her chest. Every creak of the wooden floor echoed too loud. Her dog, Murphy, kept pacing in slow, uncertain circles, occasionally growling low, eyes fixed on the darkened glass of the window. It wasn't just fear. It felt like anticipation, like the house itself was holding its breath. And Evelyn couldn't shake the thought. What if the letter was a warning? The next morning she drove straight to Malcolm's place. He lived alone, a short drive away, surrounded by tall oaks and silence. He was the kind of man who laughed off ghost stories and believed history could explain everything. But even he paused when Evelyn laid the book, the letter, and her story in front of him. He read it twice. Then he opened an old binder from his university years, flipping through photocopied pages from wartime diaries. "Here," he said, tapping a sentence underlined in red. "British soldiers during World War II, some of them swore by putting salt on the sills of field tents. They said it kept the nightmares out, the ones that felt too real." Evelyn leaned closer. "Was it just metaphor?" she asked. Malcolm didn't answer. Not yet. They kept digging. Over the next few days they uncovered stories tucked away in church archives, folklore passed down in handwritten journals, and even a recorded interview from the 1970s. A woman claimed her mother used to whisper prayers while laying down salt, saying it was not for flavor, but for light. Another account described a man who refused to sleep in a room without salt nearby. He died the one night he forgot. None of this made rational sense, but that didn't matter anymore. Evelyn wasn't chasing logic now. She was chasing truth, a deeper truth, hidden under the layers of fiction and tradition, like something C.S. Lewis might have written, masked in metaphor, but grounded in spiritual reality. But even as they connected the dots, something was changing. Lights in Evelyn's home began flickering without reason. Whispers, so faint she thought they were dreams, started coming through the walls, and always, always the windows. Something was watching, and the salt was gone. Malcolm started noticing it too. At first, he thought it was just the power grid, surges and faulty wiring. But when his laptop refused to open a single document related to spiritual warfare or Christian symbolism, and when his bookshelf collapsed only on the side that held C.S. Lewis's writings, he stopped trying to explain it away. Something didn't want them digging deeper, and the harder they pushed, the louder the silence became. Heavy, sharp, like standing in a room that used to be safe, but now carried the scent of something watching. Evelyn had begun marking the windows with new lines of salt every evening, but by morning they were always erased, not scattered, gone, no trace, no grains, not even on the floor. She even tried sealing the edges with tape. Still, nothing stayed. It was as if some invisible hand was deliberately wiping it clean, and she wasn't the only one anymore. Her neighbor, Mrs. Langley, an older woman known for her quiet routines, was found wandering her garden barefoot at 3 a.m., whispering prayers in Latin and staring at the windows of Evelyn's house like she knew something. When Evelyn finally asked her about it, Mrs. Langley said only one thing: "The windows are where they wait. That's where they listen." Then she refused to speak of it again. Meanwhile, Malcolm uncovered a rare interview with a former theologian who had once written anonymously about thin places, locations where the barrier between the natural world and the spiritual realm was fragile. According to the man's notes, old houses with deep-rooted history were often marked. He wrote, "Salt isn't just superstition, it binds, it seals, it reminds them they're not allowed in." But if it was gone, what was being let in? And more importantly, why now? The house didn't feel like hers anymore. Evelyn noticed it in the smallest ways. Clocks freezing at the same time each night, 2:17 a.m., the exact hour the salt vanished. Murphy, once playful and loyal, now refused to enter certain rooms, especially the study where she first found the letter. When he did, he would growl low, backing away from the window like something was waiting on the other side. She tried to ignore it, tried to reason. But the fear wasn't just emotional now. It was physical, like pressure in her chest, like something unseen was pressing its weight into the air around her. Malcolm, too, was unraveling. He hadn't slept in days, kept his phone recording audio at night, and what it captured left them cold. A dragging sound, slow and steady, breathing, then a whisper, just one word, over and over. Remove. They couldn't tell if it was inside the house or just outside the windows, but it was clear now something was watching, and it didn't want to be blocked anymore. That night they decided to test it. They laid salt on every windowsill in Evelyn's home, every entrance, every corner. They stayed up together, waiting. Lights dimmed. The air turned colder, but they didn't speak. Around 2:15 a.m., the hallway grew darker than the rest of the house. Not shadow dark, deeper, like the light had been swallowed. Then came the sound, not footsteps, not wind, something between the two, brushing against the wall, circling. Suddenly all the lights flickered, then silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. Evelyn looked down at the nearest sill. The salt was moving. Slowly, grain by grain, it began to scatter in perfect lines, like something invisible was sweeping it away with careful fingers. And then came the knock. From the inside, Evelyn froze. The knock, soft but deliberate, came again. Not from the door, not from the windows. From the inside, behind the wall. Malcolm stared at her, his face pale, his mouth open but silent. There was no attic behind that wall, no crawl space, just solid wood and the frame of the old house, or so they thought. Before either of them could move, the lights shut off completely. Darkness swallowed everything. Murphy barked once, sharply, then went silent. Evelyn felt her heart pounding so loudly it echoed in her ears. She reached blindly for Malcolm's hand. "Don't move," he whispered, barely audible. And then they heard it again, scraping now, like nails or claws gently tracing the inside of the wall. But then came something even more disturbing. A voice, not loud, not deep. It was a child's voice, high and clear, whispering from the darkness. "Why did you bring him here?" it said. "He doesn't belong." Malcolm recoiled, shaking his head. "Did you hear that?" Evelyn nodded, her hand trembling. The voice returned. "He broke the line. He let us in." In that moment, Evelyn's mind flashed back to something she had almost forgotten. 3 nights earlier, Malcolm had dropped his keys and accidentally brushed away a section of salt while leaning across the sill. He had cursed, laughed it off, and said he'd replace it. He never did. Suddenly the pieces fell into place. The missing salt, the whispers, the sudden escalation. Whatever this was, it hadn't just been watching. It had been waiting for a door to open. And now, something else was happening. The air in the room began to vibrate, like a low hum pressing through their bones. Evelyn felt a sharp sting in her fingertips, like static crawling under her skin. She turned toward Malcolm, but he was staring at the wall, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, completely still. Then he stepped forward, 1 step, then another, toward the wall. "Malcolm," she whispered, "stop." But he didn't. The wall, solid, painted drywall, began to shift. Not open, not crack. Shift, like it was breathing, like it was listening, and from inside came a sound no one ever wants to hear. A second knock. Then a voice that didn't belong to Malcolm anymore said, "It's already inside." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Malcolm's voice, no longer his, echoed softly in the dark, and she took a step back, hand trembling, as it reached for the flashlight on the nearby table. The moment the beam cut through the black, it landed on his face. But it wasn't the face she knew. His eyes were empty, too still, too focused, like he was staring through her, not at her. "Malcolm," she said again, more firmly, "you need to come back." But he didn't move. The wall behind him rippled like a reflection on water, pulsing with something that didn't belong in this world. And then it split, not broken or torn, but peeled open like fabric, revealing a void of shifting shadow behind it. Whispers rushed out, layered voices speaking in a language Evelyn couldn't understand, but somehow felt deep in her bones. She stepped forward, desperate, gripping Malcolm's wrist. "You didn't let it in," she said. "It tricked you." Her words didn't reach him. Not until she took the salt shaker from the shelf behind her and with one quick move poured a thick line between him and the open wall. The reaction was instant. The air cracked like glass under pressure. The wall shuddered violently and slammed shut. Malcolm gasped like waking from a nightmare and collapsed to his knees. But just as Evelyn rushed to him, the final twist struck. On the floor, spilled from her grip, the last of the salt rolled toward the window, and before either of them could move, a gust of wind, not from inside, but somehow from the wall, swept across the room and blew every last grain away. Gone. And then the quiet returned. Not peace, just silence. Outside the window, the world looked normal again. No movement, no sound. But as Evelyn stared into the reflection of the glass, she saw not her own face, but something standing behind her, something pale, watching, waiting. That's when she understood. The salt had never been for keeping something out. It was for keeping her in. And now, the line was broken. Evelyn didn't turn around right away. She couldn't. The reflection stayed still, unmoving, as if daring her to acknowledge it. But as the seconds passed, the figure slowly faded, like steam on glass, leaving nothing but her own terrified expression staring back. She dropped to her knees beside Malcolm, still shaking, and together they sat in silence, letting the night settle again. No more sounds, no more whispers. Just the creak of the old house trying to remember how to be still. The next morning, they salted the windows again, not because they believed it would fix everything, but because it felt like a promise, a line drawn not just for protection, but as a reminder that something had shifted. Malcolm didn't say much, but Evelyn could see it in his face. He remembered everything, the voice, the wall, the feeling of something else taking hold of him. Whatever force had been playing at the edge of their reality, it hadn't left. It had simply stepped back. They began researching more, this time focusing on C.S. Lewis, not just his fiction, but his letters and essays. In one, buried deep in a rarely discussed piece, he wrote about the power of thresholds, not doors, not gates, but the spaces in between, where belief becomes sight, where reason ends and something older waits. Evelyn read that line over and over. Maybe Lewis knew. Maybe he'd seen something too. Mrs. Langley moved away a few days later. No goodbyes. Just packed her things and left a small box on Evelyn's porch. Inside were 3 old jars of sea salt, a silver cross, and a note. Some doors you don't close. You just learn not to open them again. Evelyn never tried to explain any of it to others. Not in detail. But she did start sharing what she'd learned, quietly, carefully. The stories, the signs, the forgotten ways people used to guard their homes. Salt on the windowsill, prayers whispered at dusk, light left on in empty rooms. Not out of fear, but awareness, respect. And from that day on, Evelyn never let the line break again. Because once you've seen what waits on the other side of the window, you never forget. You just learn to live with the watching,